Hello every folks, and good morning. So today, I want to talk about skill slots. I know, don't get too excited as you can hear those chickens in the background. It is just, it's one of those topics that is super exciting. Anyway, let's get into it here. Namely, is it true that Reborn had less skills? Because here's the interesting thing. Despite the fact that, technically speaking, Reborn changed it so that you have 4 slots instead of 10, deceptively, you actually have dramatically more. And by dramatically more, when I was counting the same build in multiple cases, the same build that took 10 slots to build in the original PSP version, this was a warrior caster hybrid. Basically, there was a lot of kind of interesting stuff you could do with the skills in both versions. But a lot of those ideas, like for example that 10 slot build there, would essentially have equaled to 16 slots in Reborn if we were to count up all the things that they could do. But this actually takes a little bit of explanation and a little bit of background on a lot of things in order to kind of make sense. So first and foremost, it has to be understood that when it came to Reborn, a lot of the reworks that they did were for the purpose of kind of experiencing the world and story and whatever else in a more fluid manner. When it came to a lot of these skill slots in the original PSP version, at the time there was a very big emphasis on trying to kind of get as much almost like MMO-esque stuff out of your games as possible, especially on ones that you would travel around with, namely one on the PSP. See no further than what they did with, I think it was it Star Ocean that got the ridiculously grindy MMOs on the PSP there. There were a lot of PSP games that just had this in mind. Again, look at Peace Walker, look at Tactics Ogre, look at your Star Oceans, look at your Monster Hunters. It was a platform that very heavily emphasized this kinds of stuff. So, for example, while the PSP version had a hell of a lot of detail to its systems, there were a lot of cases where things were just straight up redundant or stacked in different ways or detailed to a degree that nobody ever realistically would probably pay attention to. For example, quick little pop quiz. How many of you can tell me the differences between parry and deflect? I'll just give that a few seconds. Did you potentially guess that their entire kind of activation order is entirely backwards? Namely, when it came to parry, you may have potentially noticed this little thing right here, where at the end of the game, you might have gotten some ranks of parry, you might have gotten no ranks of deflect. Now, you might be thinking, well, maybe I just didn't get shot by arrows as much. And no, realistically, arrows shoot way more often than melee attacks do. But the actual activation order of these is entirely different. So, for example, with parry, if you block with a shield, your parry is still rolling in the background to catch the hit behind your shield. In the case of deflect, it's essentially functioning under dodgeball logic, where if you're not threatened by it, you're not going to be too scared enough. You're not going to be scared enough to move out of the way. So, essentially, deflect in this case, unless you had a 100% chance to hit, there was a pretty decent chance that you were never going to roll deflect. If it missed, you never got a chance to train the skill, because skills only trained up when you were actively getting a chance to roll them in the equation to some degree. Same thing for overpower. It's essentially functioning the same way as these things, detailed to such a degree that if overpower were to trigger while, for example, you have parry or deflect active, for example, somebody fires an arrow and deflect activates, it actually bounces off their face even though the unit gets knocked backwards. There were all these little details to all of these skills that realistically nobody ever figured out, let's be honest. A lot of this stuff was insanely detailed to the point of near irrelevant. So essentially what they did was just combine a lot of this stuff in a way that made a lot more sense. And in fact, if we just take a look at the skill list right here, you might notice a crazy thing right here where, for example, oh no, I can't equip all of this shit at once. No, don't get me wrong. I'm kind of making fun of the PSP version because, it's the topic at hand. I do love the hell out of the PSP version, but let's be honest, a lot of these skills were very, very redundant in a lot of cases, and in many cases this was on purpose. For example, if you have your weapon skill, you have your, do I have an augment over here? Yes. So for example, anatomy, augment, katana, okay? You already have 30% of your skill list dedicated to the exact same purpose as just your weapon skill in Reborn. All of these do the same thing. They're increasing your attack bonus, aka your penetration bonus, and your defense against that particular thing. Now, this bonus, for example, in the weapons case, you may notice it's not exactly too significant in Reborn. In PSP, it was actually broken enough that Okay, it was a weird case of a skill that was completely broken, but also so freaking niche that nobody ever figured it out. So, for example, if you watch the level 1 run video, it was abusing the hell out of the mechanics for this one, where if you understood a weapon, you gained armor against that weapon, which is, again, a cool mechanic. It's still there in Reborn, but it stacked so hard in this one because defense was very, very heavily emphasized in the US release of this game, that you could actually abuse this to, for example, use warrior units to just have universal armor against any weapons on the field. It was pretty fantastic. But anyway, so essentially what they did was take all the skills on this list and just kind of work them into the system. So for example, instead of anatomy, augdark, and your weapon proficiency, it just became your weapon proficiency. Your augment became part of your character. Your attenuate, which you have attenuates as part of this as well, which basically used your augment rank, also just became part of your character. In the case of your racial skills, the only actual function of these that was lost was when it came to recruit, because you could essentially use this to grind your way to a near perfect recruitment score, because it was essentially loyalty plus your racial rank of that particular thing plus your actual recruit rank that all could be ranked up as you use them. Now, before you get any bright ideas, you had to use these I think over 1,000 times each, and they cost dramatically more, almost twice as much in this version to actually activate, in order to actually, I think we even have it down here somewhere. Do we? It's possible. I'm pretty sure Denim has it over here somewhere down in this endless list of skills. But basically the idea was that you could, it was still 40 in this one. I just want to make sure I wasn't misremembering. So this is 25 in Reborn, that's 40 here, and again, you had to use this over 1,000 times to actually get it to that rank. It took a very long time. You're talking about like 0.3, 0.5-ish%, and this experience is then split between all of those different skills that used it to activate. If you got Recruit to rank 2, it was nothing short of a miracle, let alone getting it up to rank 8. So, this is one of those things that's kind of cool on paper, but realistically, nobody actually used it, so it got thrown by the wayside, which is understandable. Let's just kind of go down the list of kind of different stuff that's available here to kind of get into this a bit more. So yeah, racials, that was their whole thing. They went up really slowly. Pretty much the only two that ended up getting used was anatomy, because it was bugged, because it actually only checked, just like the weapon skill ranks, or sorry, just like your weapon profile armor situation, likely the same bug actually. In Reborn, anatomy here basically has a thing where it only checks the racial, kind of the racial status of the unit in question. Not the unit that's attacking like it's supposed to, so this basically just gives you universal armor versus everything. Teratology, beasts didn't really have enough armor to justify carrying this. Herpetology, sometimes you would, but realistically not very often. Draconology, yes, dragons were very high armor in this one, but usually you would just use Dragon Slayer to ignore it. Sacrology, who honestly will, go out of their way to get the skill that lets you penetrate a fairy's defense better. Really? Umbra units, fairy unit. Okay, fairy are actually their own thing. I forgot about that. I think Sacrology and Orology might have actually been combined in one vision or something. I don't know. These two are skills that are so freaking niche that you will never ever use them. Thetanology, ghosts. Golemy is okay. That one's understandable. But either way, that was quite its own thing. And then you had your augments, which basically just increased your proficiency with that particular element. These didn't have a weakness to them. It was just a straight kind of penetration bonus when it came to this stuff. So, for example, multi-auging back in the PSP version consisted of you equip 20% of your slots with your different elements. Like, for example, you have a fire axe and you've got a ice finisher or something like that, and you could just equip both of them and they would stack on top of each other. The Reborn version has them kind of interacting in different ways. Kind of one element might be, strong against another, that kind of situation. And additionally, you could essentially use it to swap elements mid-fight. Now, look, honestly, both versions have their merits. I think both are pretty interesting in their own right. But either way, that's just kind of the difference between the two. Again, parry and deflect just got combined under parry rules. Perfect, as it should be. Honestly, the difference between them, especially the fact that it only said parry, there was no specific thing for deflect, led many folks to believe that only parry actually did anything. This was a confusion that lasted for probably about a decade. Overpowered just became a vigorous attack and eagle eye, which those skills already existed in this version, but it's just a better way of doing it, because it's guaranteed instead of, well, I'm just going to hope and pray that this thing activates in multiplayer, which, again, nobody really played, but if you were testing around with it, Overpower was really overpowered. But in single player, realistically, it was just kind of impractical to even bother carrying around. In most cases, folks would just go and use Chariot to get around it anyway. So realistically, it wasn't one of those things that happened. Resists, so you got resists that are available for every single debuff type, as well as proofs that are available for every single debuff type. So the proofs and resists are a weird story. The proofs, I get why they were removed, because basically the end game, especially in the PSP version, in many ways became a situation where you were trying to completely erase the debuffs that you were commonly running into. So for example, things like stun, things like charm, all of that sort of thing, things like stone in particular. Now, as far as the debuffs go, while I don't think it was originally intentional to have all those debuffs kind of buffed out as much as they were, I feel like in many cases it wound up being a happy accident, because again, one of those common complaints that players had for this version was like, hey, all my people are not doing anything, they're stunned, they're not countering anymore, you know. Like, it was just too much for people to kind of get, and they ended up nerfing stun anyway by making it so that it's only a 50% action thing, and then the whole not being able to counter thing became just curses thing, which, you know, fair enough. It kind of gives it a bit more of an interesting kind of vibe there. Poison and venom are not distinct things; they were just combined into, you know, venom, but it's percentage based now. But again, when it came to a lot of these proofs, it was literally just like you become instantly completely untargetable by that particular thing, but the AI was not allowed to discriminate with moves when it didn't have a chance to hit. So functionally speaking, like, you had a case right from the get-go where, for example, Denim started off with the most broken item, like as far as accessories goes right from the get-go. Arguably, this thing was second only to the Crest of Fire, where, for example, you had your luck bonus, you had your strength, you had your vit, all of that, it weighed nothing, and then also it came with stun proof, which happens to be the most common debuff. So basically what you do is you make his avoidance absolutely terrible, and then, or just give him like low mind or whatever, and he would constantly get targeted by stun, and then you just put resist stun, like for example with a shield, on everybody else, and then just stun is not an issue for the entire party. But then at that point you're basically like building your entire party around avoiding a debuff that may or may not happen, which again, you know, sometimes you want to do that kind of thing, but for the vast majority of people, it just was confusing. There was just too much of that kind of stuff lying around. Okay. Anyway, next up here, let's go ahead and go into like, let's see, Rampant Aura is still there. The Attenuates, again, are just built into personal element at this point. Counterattack just became a function of weapons. Knockback just became built into every character. It's basically the equivalent of Knockback 1, I believe, and or it might be tied to luck as a separate kind of... I feel like it's kind of tied as a separate crit roll, possibly, because you can still get natural crits, but if like the way that knockbacks work feel very similar to the way that natural crits work in the PSP version, so I feel that it just got reworked into the system there. Strengthen 1 to 4, which I only have 1 to 3 on this guy because test file shenanigans, but basically you have Strengthen 1 to 4, those just became the Fizz Up cards. Fortify 1 to 4 just got removed. Basically, these would completely counteract the strengthen abilities, and in many cases this led to those cases where, for example, I think it was Zabos, they came in with Fortify 2, and if you didn't have strengthen, you were basically entirely functioning off of armor penetration to do any damage. You couldn't scale up your damage versus the guy, and it, again, led to a lot of players getting frustrated that they just simply could not hurt a boss. Again, the same old thing that people complain about over, you know, oh, boss hit too hard, what can I do? Was the exact same complaints that they were getting for a while, of like, oh, why can't I hurt this boss? And it's like, well, they had Fortify, it was countering any strengthens that you had, you were relying on strengthen too much, but how exactly do you convey that? Well, instead Fortify gets removed, strengthen becomes a card thing, suddenly it's very obvious of like, this guy has 1 rank over this guy in terms of physical advantage. Either way. Resistance ended up getting removed because in many cases this was kind of pointless, especially in this version, because it was either armor penetrated by magic or it wasn't. And so what they did instead, since resistance rarely got a chance to actually come up, because in most cases, resistance was completely unnecessary because magic would end up getting eaten by armor. So what they did was remove resistance, and then they also made it so that vitality no longer contributes armor versus magic. So essentially this would have kind of just been a no-brainer. So instead, this skill ends up getting removed, and kind of magic finally gets to flex, so to speak. True Strike just became built into everybody. True Flight became built into everybody. Dodge, I kind of like how they redid this one, because it seems like they didn't quite have the immediate idea, but they're like, okay, what if we just sort of lock dodge percentage to 70% maximum chance to hit, and especially when combined with the sudden added effect of a lot of the ground tiles, you can actually still get very similar dodge rates to how you could in the PSP version, just kind of using the weather, using good terrain, using the dodge buff. I kind of like how they redid this one. It does make it so the fights go a lot faster because everyone's more accurate in general, but it does lead to this interesting thing where if you want to specifically make a dodge build, you absolutely have the option. It's just not just stacking one stat anymore. You got to kind of work the environment, as it were. Same thing for Sidestep, which, by the way, Filters of Ashes, absolutely solid for this one. Constitution just got limited to rank 1 and 2 instead of going up to 4 for kind of obvious reasons of 40% bonus health is bonkers. Expand Mind, just kind of built into the system and or is part of MP cards. It should be noted that Expand Mind, while it says increases MP restoration, as well as Tactician, which increases TP restoration, both of them function the same way, and it's not the way that you probably think, because they're not just like giving you a percentage bonus to your amount. Like, you get a flat amount in the PSP version, you get a flat amount to your MP plus however much is on your MP bar. So basically, just some percentage of your MP bar as well as your natural regeneration is how much you're getting there. So for example, naturally you're getting like 10-ish, give or take, MP per round, but then Expand Mind would be like, oh, maybe you get 20, maybe you get 30. Like, you're not getting a scaling bonus, you're not getting a crazy amount, but this is just kind of just to help you with the trickle in the background, because at the same time you also have versions like Channeling over here, and actually maybe one of the other characters has the other one. You basically have one that increases your MP bar, you have one that increases your... apparently I don't have every skill on everybody here. But yeah, you have one that increases your MP bar, you have one that increases your regeneration, and then one that increases your... or that decreases the cost of your spells, which that was all just kind of built in. So yeah, Resistance, True Strike, True Flight, Spell Strike, which just became a locked-in minimum 30% hit chance, and or it increases your odds to hit by 30%. Again, I like the way that they did this one, because Spell Strike 4 was basically just guaranteed your debuffs are going to hit, and for a lot of the debuffs, especially stuff like Brimstone, where it's like your entire bar gets depleted and you're stuck with Envenom, like a lot of that stuff was extremely broken but extremely inaccurate, but then if you built for accuracy, you were completely untouchable. Especially stuff like Balmy Breeze, where it's just AoE put half the dang team to sleep. It was kind of a no-brainer in a lot of cases. Not that it's not fun, I'm just saying it was kind of a no-brainer. But anyway, so Spell Ward, the actual magic avoidance thing that you wanted, because it made debuffs not exist, which frankly, I think a lot of players just kind of ran this by default. Because again, you know, you just avoid the debuffs and then suddenly the mages do nothing. They literally cannot touch you. Swiftfoot got built into equipment, Jump got built into equipment, Wade got built into equipment, Field Alchemy is just built into your unit. And then, you know, you got all your usual same skills that are there in Reborn as well, and you additionally got new stuff that was added in. These are some of the only two that actually got removed because they were redundant. So for example, HP Infusion, quite frankly, you would just use an item. It's like HP Infusion needs the TP bar to function, there is no TP bar, so, you know, it would basically just be MP for HP, and realistically I don't see anyone making that trade. At the same time, MP Infusion was redundant because they also had Conserve MP, and there was almost no situation where you'd realistically want to use MP Infusion because you're essentially taking TP, converting it to MP. But then again, that trade didn't exactly make a whole lot of sense. Obviously, you can't trade MP for MP, and at the same time, you don't want to trade like MP for HP specifically. I mean, it could work, but still, kind of seems... I would figure this one probably just had more of a kind of, it was hard locked to do one particular reference kind of situation. Either way, generally speaking, this was kind of redundant because Conserve MP is just the one you'd want to use most of the time anyway. Anyway, because yeah, Conserve MP, 16 recovery time, You just get all your MP for free. MP infusion, you probably have less than 100 TP built up anyway. As a fencer, you probably want to be using that TP bar for stuff. So realistically, unless somebody saved up more than 100 specifically for this reason, it's just a weird choice overall, but any dangways. And again, remember in this version, you also had to basically sacrifice 2 of your slots to even use magic whatsoever, because you had to equip the magic itself as well as the augment for it. If you wanted it to do anything other than debuffs, then you realistically also wanted to use your racial skills here. Then you probably also wanted your parry or deflect in most cases. Then you also wanted to use your kind of passive buffs, typically used about 4 of these. And then congratulations, you're basically left with 2 slots anyway for whatever actual action skills you want to have available. So hopefully this helps to kind of explain a little bit in context that most of the stuff that's here was built into the system itself, whereas a lot of the kind of a lot of the more interesting ones are still there and in many cases improved and or added upon. So for example, instead of having back attack, in which you'd go and you'd set up an attack to go attack somebody's back, it became pincer. And actually one last thing just to point this out here, so chokers and things like that. So these definitely did get changed a decent bit. And just to point out, in many ways they are actually functioning in a similar role to how they used to here. It's just kind of weird because of course it is, it's a Matsuno game, but to point this out, like in the case of the Storm Choker, this would be an exception because it's, you know, Aug Lightning. In Reborn, it's essentially just giving you armor versus the thing that you're weak against. But in the case of your weapons, the actual kind of elemental effect that you're getting here is essentially stepping in those cases, at least in the one-handed versions. Like if you have for example, a thing that you're ineffective against, or rather if you are effective against it, in the case of either your weapon or your spell, in different degrees, we're not getting into that right now, but basically if you are effective against the other guy, you will get a bonus, but if you're ineffective, you won't. But if your weapon is, then it will step in and be like, hey, you know, I can go ahead and serve up that element for you if you'd like, sir. And in this case, they actually increased the elemental bonuses of all of these to potentially up to 30 or higher %. So just kind of to throw that out there, that a lot of these were fairly uniform. To this day, I still have no idea what on earth they have against, Zolodal's Canine. This thing is just kind of a POS in every version that it's ever showed up, but whatever. That for some reason, it's just a boss weapon that doesn't get a chance to shine. Like, you got friggin' the vignette is whatever, talons over here. They're like, oh, you get your augment, you get your spell casts or whatever. Or actually, wait, which friggin' one was it? That, was it the Phase Vana or whatever? I forget which one's from, I'm pretty sure it was the talons. Yeah, I'm like 90% sure it's from the talons. But either way, you get all these, like, fancy things on all the other ones, and then just the poor Zolodal's Canine just gets to feel sad every time. Anyway, so hopefully this helped to kind of clarify a few things in terms of, like, just because there's less slots doesn't mean there's less options. Basically, most of the passives got built into the system itself rather than being something that you specifically had to point out. Because for those that never experienced the PSP version, it's not exactly the fastest thing in the world, and there were quite a few cases where, quite frankly, you'd get into a fight and it's like, oh, I forgot to equip a certain skill, and then you were just kind of SOL at that point, because it's already too late to improve that skill. It's too late for any of that. And actually, if you ever go back to the PSP version, you might be shocked about how summons work, because, yeah, the summons in this one, in most cases, they actually can't get past armor. There's very few cases where they can, and this is one of those reasons that I say shamans were very heavily nerfed since the PSP version, because, basically in the PSP version, they were one of the few that actually were able to take those summons and give them enough punch to break past armor. That was kind of the whole deal behind Nature's Power, and then suddenly just everybody can use it. So I want to make a separate video on this at some point on mod ideas, but I still think that the Shaman needed to have more of an AoE boost, more than a direct power boost for Reborn, because everybody got the freaking power boost. It's practically candy that they were handing out. But imagine if it was more like the SNES version, and then they were just like given an AoE boost instead, that they could just kind of, boost the range by 2 or something, just kind of use the songstress mechanic or something. Maybe just make an AoE burst out of whatever spell they have on hand. I don't know. Anyway, so hopefully this helped to explain a few things. Y'all have a good one. Take care. I'll see you later.